Welcome to the first episode of the Spirit of Western States, the official podcast of the world's oldest and most iconic 100-mile trail race, the Western States Endurance Run. I'm Carrie Meng, the Assistant Race Director of Western States, and I'm honored to be hosting this podcast with the legendary John Trent. John, thank you so much for being here with me. Figured we could kick this off by you telling everybody what your role is with Western States. Most people probably already know who John Trent is, but for those that don't, what your role is with Western States and maybe a little bit of history of how you got involved in Western States.
Yeah. Well, Carrie, first of all, I'm honored to be a part of this with you. It's going to be an incredible journey. I'm looking forward to it. I think we're going to have a lot of fun, and we're going to, share a lot of different aspects of the race. So, my involvement with the race goes back. I was a young journalist right out of journalism school in 1986. I covered the race for the very first time in 1987. And since that time, fell in love with the race. I ran the race. I'm an 11-time finisher of Western States. Joined the board in 2004. So I've been on the board since 2004. Lucky enough from 2010 to 2015 to be the president of our organization as well. Western States has kind of taken over my life in many ways. My family is a big part of this. Both my daughters, Annie and Katie, have been Western States finishers. We live Western States at all times. I've written a book about Western States called Second Sunrise, 5 Decades of History, the Western States Endurance Run, which kind of chronicles the history of the race. And I think for the purposes of this webcast, I wouldn't say that I'm the historian of Western States. There are a lot of other people that have, been a part of that and have chronicled it as well. But if there's a sort of unofficial tag of somebody who's, really into the history of Western States, because of my involvement, that's the way I feel about it. I really get into the history of what we were then. And I think it explains where we are now.
Absolutely. And I was going to call you the historian of Western States anyways, but I know there are a lot of folks that have been around since the beginning or a long time as well. But definitely on this podcast, out of these two people, you are the historian of Western States.
You're quickly writing your own history.
I'm trying, John, and am honored to even just be here conversating with you, to be part of the organization. I came on in the beginning of 2023, answered a Facebook post of Craig Thornley, the race director, looking for an admin assistant. And I've been race directing for a long time and had never been to Western States, but of course knew about Western States. And when I saw that post, I couldn't get on my computer fast enough to apply, and applied and interviewed with him and Diana, who at the time was the president of the board, and was lucky enough to be offered the job. And then after my first working of Western States, 2023, offered the assistant race director positions. So yeah, my history is a lot shorter. So I'm hoping that with your very deep history and my newness, that we bring a fresh take, and that the dynamics can be relatable to anyone who's listening, whether they've been around forever or if they're just hearing about the race or the first time in the lottery. So thank you for doing this with me, John. I'm super excited that we're finally getting started. We started talking about this over a year ago, and then things happen and life happens and kind of kept getting pushed back, and we're finally here recording our first episode.
Carrie, real quickly, can I add about your role and what you do? I don't think there's anybody who has, as quickly as you have, has come to understand what the race is all about, and to also be involved with so many different aspects of the race. Again, I always think of Western States as a lot of different buckets, and your hand is in every bucket that's associated with Western States, whether it's race organization, whether it's community relations, trail work, handling golden tickets and handing them out and things like that. And then also the real litmus test of whether or not, you have established yourself at Western States is if you run the race, which you did this past year. And I think the litmus test there is the larger the group that a person has as they come down off the White Bridge and runs into the stadium at the finish, probably the more consequential they are. And Carrie had a huge group of people following her into the stadium, which I think speaks to the connection that Carrie has not only in her life with her friends, but also this community of Western States people that she's come to know as well. It was a great kind of combination of all of that. It was a wonderful moment, and I think it's again spoke to the way you've just in a very short period of time you've really connected with the spirit of the race.
Thank you, John. That was very special. I appreciate you saying all that. And yes, I did have the privilege of running Western States this year, something I never thought I'd ever be able to say. I just ran my first 100-mile race last year. It's one of those things that, like, every year I'm like, this is the year I run 100 miles. And it just years would go by and I still hadn't run a 100-mile race for one reason or another, and decided last year to run a race here in Florida. I'm in Florida. I didn't mention that.
Mhm.
And there's one Western States qualifying race in Florida. Big surprise, it's very flat race, trail race,
Mhm.
and, it's called the Long Haul, and I ran that at the beginning of 2024 and got my qualifying time. Still did not know at that time I was going to run Western States, but I was like, well, let me run a 100-miler and I'm just going to make sure it's a qualifying race just in case there's any possibility. And Craig Thornley, with the support of the board, offered me a spot in this year's race to get that invaluable experience from a runner's perspective. And it was everything and more and of what I expect or wanted and didn't expect.
Mhm.
Sometimes the journey that you want or you think is going to happen isn't the journey that you get, but maybe it's the journey that you need. And I made sure that I got the full experience and stayed out there almost the entire 30 hours and finished in the very magical golden hour. And just over under 29:30. So it was a beautiful experience. And, speaking of that entourage I had coming into the track, most of that was completely unexpected. I had my crew there, which was my husband and several of my best friends. And as I came up to Roby Point, two people joined, two more people, four, and my coworkers that I also work part time at Ultra Sign Up, they were standing there. Somebody I had never met, only through Teams meetings, was saying, I'm like, oh my gosh, that looks like my coworker Jason. And he jumps in, and Shelby and David and Jay and Anne Marie, and then Bill Hambrick, who was the assistant RD
Yeah.
before I was. Um, who I've worked very closely with since starting here, he jumped in. And then Mo, who was my coach for my first 100-mile race, she was there. And then we get on the white bridge and I see this girl jumping up and down with her hands and this giant smile, Emily Hawgood. So she had
Mhm.
finished the night before in top 10 and came back out. And it was such a special moment to help run me in. And so we just filled the street. And I think I cried for like the entire last miles, especially when I hit the track, and just the emotions and the cheering and people. I'm going to try not to cry right now. Um, Yelling my name and hearing Tropical John announce me and the assistant race director of Western States, Carrie Meng, coming around. Oh, it was like just a dream I never even had come true, if that makes sense. So,
Yeah.
that I never even imagined could be my life. So it was such a wonderful moment and a wonderful experience. And like you said, being able to experience it as a runner, being the assistant race director, I think, there's nothing that can replace that. And I have just a whole different level of respect and knowledge for not just the runners, but also all of our volunteers along the course, some that I don't get to see that throughout the years of planning, our aid station captains and stuff, but I got to see them out there and see their investment in every single runner that's coming through, regardless if they're first or last. So anyhow, I know that was a little tangent that we weren't planning on getting off on,
That's
but anyhow,
okay.
it was a it was a wonderful moment, and I appreciate you and the whole board for supporting me in that journey and giving me one of those extremely coveted spots this year. Back to
Yeah.
working next year, though.
Of course.
Yes. Um, so, so John, we are in the midst of the lottery for our 2026 race. Lottery is coming up soon. The first is Saturday of December, which will be December 6th this year, held in Auburn in person. So we have an in-person lottery that we have 700 people or so show up for that, and then we also live broadcast it, which we'll be posting the link, for that on our website for live stream. And I was hoping you could give us a history of the lottery. Like, how did it come about that Western states needed a lottery, or like when it started? And how did that look then compared to what our lottery looks like now?
Yeah, it's an interesting story, Carrie, how it came about. Because I don't think the folks that were organizing and founding Western states ever envisioned having a lottery, but it happened pretty quickly, actually. For those that know the history of the race, Wendell Roby had established the Tevis Cup, the horse race, which essentially went from originally Tahoe City, but eventually to Palisades, Tahoe to Auburn, 100 miles horse ride. And then Gordy Ainsleigh, of course, 1974, ran with the horses and successfully completed the 100-mile course in under 24 hours. Then Cowman Shirk finished the race. And then in 1977 was kind of like the first kind of combination of letting in, more than just one runner. There were 14 runners, and one runner finished. Andy Gonzalez finished under 24 hours. Two runners, Dr. Ralph Paffenberger and Peter Matei, they finished over 24 hours, but under 30. So there were three finishers that year. And then fall of 1977, and with the blessing of Wendell Roby, the decision is made that there should be separate. There should be the horse ride and the runner's race. And they should be held separately, or at least have different organizational bodies. So fall of 1977, there's a board of governors that gets together. They start organizing the 1978 run. 1978 is notable in that there was 63 runners. I think it's 28 who finished. Few runners finished over 30 hours, but that was okay too. They were sort of counted as well. And so from that, there's kind of an explosion that happens. By 1979, there are here's the first trivia question for you, Carrie. So 1978, 1979, when the event is held, what's the entry fee for the runners that year?
Entry fee in 1979. Let's go with $50.
Yeah, that wouldn't be, and eventually it did go to that, but it originally was $10.
In
So all you had to
1979?
do is that was 1978 it was $10, and then 1979, as the popularity went up, it goes to 50. You're right.
Oh,
But the first run in 78 it was $10,
okay.
and then it
Oh,
goes
I
up
got
to
that.
79.
Okay.
Which one of the runners in the 79 race said for $50 it's a bargain, which it was. But originally the first entry fee was $10, and then quickly to 50, because already I think what the increase in the entry fee shows is there's great interest in the race. So it grows. 1979, there's 143 runners that year with the $50 entry fee and 96 finishers. So already it's gone from 14 to 63 to 143. So already there's great demand. And so then when there's 251 starters in 1980, they institute for the first time. You have to show that you were actually, I take that back, in 79 for the first time. You had to also show that you could cover 100 miles by providing proof that you'd run 50 miles in under 10 hours. So that was the first kind of qualifying standard, was 1979 for that. Even with
One
that,
real quick question. How do people in 1978, 79, how do you find out about Western states? It's not on
yeah.
Facebook or Instagram or YouTube. Like, where do people find out about this race that it's more than, doubling in participation year to year?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's even better than the internet or anything that has come to exist. And the reason why it's better was it was powered by two people, really, Shannon Weil and Mo Livermore, who were they, along with Phil Gardner and Kurt Sproul, the Gang of Four. They were the organizing forces, and really Mo and Shannon were kind of like the marketers of this new event. 1978, 79, they take out an ad in Runner's World magazine, which touts the race. Shannon has she has connections in New York City. Shannon is kind of among many things, is kind of a bohemian kind of person. She had connections in Greenwich Village. She had a connection at Sports Illustrated.
Wow.
Gil Rogan, who was a writer for Sports Illustrated, who knew Shannon. So there are articles that are generated in publications about Western states. So there's that, and then there's this sort of great word of mouth that happens. A guy by the name of Phil Lenahan, who worked for Runner's World. Phil develops like this sort of slideshow that he takes out to as people are camping out at runs the night before, he would show them this slideshow of Western states. So slowly, all this stuff kind of comes together where there's actually great awareness about it, considering everything. But it boils down to what has been come to be known as Moshan. Mo Livermore and Shannon, while really, marketed the heck out of this race and figured out kind of a grassroots approach to the point where by 1980 they have to institute a lottery. So that was the first time Western States holds its lottery. It's because it's up to 250 runners who can get in, and it just seems like it's a lot. From that lottery, by about 3 years' time after that, by 1983, there are more than 1,200 people that are starting to annually apply for the lottery. So that's, and since then the lottery has existed as the way you get into Western states, because um, the supply and the demand question, it quickly became a real dilemma for the organizers early on in the race.
And can you paint a picture of what entering the lottery looked like in the 80s? Like, what was the process? Because I can talk about what it looks like now that technology has evolved, but then how would one go about entering the lottery?
Yeah, so again, you had to provide, that I think they held on to that 50-mile qualifying standard. So you had to supply the proof that you'd finished a 50-miler in under 10 hours, and I think eventually it became that's pretty fast actually. So that they
That is
relaxed that a
fast.
bit.
When you said it, I was
Yeah.
like, "Whoa."
Yeah. And so yeah, you had that you had to, and you also had to send in your entry fee, which, if you were chosen, they would cash the check. And if they didn't, they would send the check back. And that was this is in the days of where you'd have, you'd send in a check or a money order, for like, myself, when I started entering the race in the 1990s, I started getting so paranoid I would actually use a money order rather than a check, because I was a journalist at that time. I didn't have a lot of money. Sometimes we were down to zero and I'd be afraid that the check would bounce, but the money order wouldn't. So I'd send that in. So they'd send those in. And then eventually it got to the point where, they started having, they would select, they would use, to get all these names in and just draw them out of a hat type of thing. And then eventually it grew to the point where, they had it in the cafeteria at Placer High School, where it's funny because there's a lot of pomp and circumstance to the lottery that folks will experience here in a little bit, and here in when our lottery is held in 2025 of December. But back then, you'd go into the cafeteria. It'd be packed in this little cafeteria. They tried to really liven things up. They'd get like one of the aid station Gatorade, containers that normally have electrolyte solution or water in, and they put all the names in there, and then there'd be some dry ice that they'd have. So it'd be kind of like, ooh, this is kind of mystical and stuff, and bring that out, and then pick out the names out of the Gatorade jug, essentially.
That's great. That's fantastic. That makes me wanna bring a Gatorade jug of dry ice to the lottery in December and see who catches on to the significance of that. Yeah, so a little bit different now, that we have over 10,000 people applying for those spots.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and
it's,
Carrie,
gone
there's one
electronic,
other
which it was
aspect that
not that many years ago that we.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh,
Sorry
no,
about
you're fine.
that. That
Yeah, I was just saying that it's ch that's okay. That it looks quite a bit different now with the, electronic drawing of the lottery, and that has been pretty recent that we've switched to electronic. I know there were times I was watching the live stream, of the lottery and see the actual big wheel they're turning with the big basket and drawing out the paper names. So I think it was just in the recent few years that this has gone electronic, and I'm envisioning all of them cutting all those names. And somebody, Ted, just one of, our tech guy, Ted, recently made a comment like when we were up to, I don't remember, like let's say 8,000 uh, people applying with over 70,000 tickets. He's like, that would be a lot of cutting if we were still cutting. Yeah, to imagine all of us with our scissors out cutting up and folding names to put in, it's pretty funny to think of, but it's not that too far off from reality or that distant past that's what was happening. So lottery coming up in December, we have, like I said, over 10,000 people, our biggest lottery ever, and we mentioned that, or maybe we didn't mention that there's 369 spots in the race, but we do not have 369 spots that are pooled at the lottery because there are various other ways that people get into the race. I can talk about that real quick. And then if you would give us a little history of where that number 369 came for, because it seems awfully random. But as
Mhm.
far as our entry methods, or our top 10 male and female runners from the previous year are invited back. So, out of that 20, not it's not the same every year of how many return, but most of them do. So we have top 10 male and female from previous year are invited back. On the elite side, we also have our golden ticket races. So we have 30 total spots that go to golden ticket, 15 male, 15 female. There's 6 golden ticket races. And so you can race your way in and getting either a top 2 or top 3, depending on the race finish, and get it. And you had mentioned that briefly when you were talking about all the buckets my hands are in. So I do want to mention a
Mhm.
slight side note here that I had the honor of taking Craig's place at Javelina this year
Uh,
to present the golden tickets. And if you've ever been to Javelina before, I mean, you have. You were there running 100 miles just a few weeks ago. Listeners, if you've ever been to Javelina or seen the videos, it's a pretty big costume party in addition to a 100-mile, 100K, or I think 30K. Um, but it's right before Halloween typically, and a lot of people dress up. So when I got into Phoenix the night before, I hit a few shops and was able to find a Willy Wonka costume. And I was at the finish line Saturday night waiting for
yeah.
our top 2 men and women to finish to offer them the golden tickets dressed as Willy Wonka. And it was definitely a career highlight and a moment of, you never could have told me, even, I don't know, a couple years ago, that part of your job is going to be giving out these, giant golden tickets to Western states dressed as Willy Wonka at the end of a 100-mile race. But it was just one of those moments of like just sheer gratitude and fun. And I got to watch you doing your thing out there with a
Oh,
huge smile coming through
yeah.
every loop after a
Yeah.
really tough year or two of injuries, and you did it, and you got your 100-miler, however many that makes now, as a pure inspiration to all of us. So that was another huge benefit of me being able to go to Javelina, was to see you out there in the desert and doing what you love. Okay, that was a
Yeah.
side note on the golden tickets. Going back to how to get in the race, we have certain sponsors that have a spot that they can designate a runner to get in the race. We have special consideration, and the number of special consideration spots does vary from year to year. It depends on the applicants, and we have a committee as part of the board that votes on those spots. We have a silver legend entry every year, and that's somebody that's over 60, that
Mhm.
we have multiple people apply for that every year. And there's certain criteria that our committee looks at for that as well to award the Silver Legend. And we also have a raffle, not to be confused with the lottery, because the raffle is different. You can
Yeah.
purchase raffle tickets at the lottery in person in Auburn, and then also in June at the expo at the start in Palisades. You can purchase raffle tickets. And we may try to sell some at various races, and definitely at training camp next May as well. But basically, you can buy as many raffle tickets as you want. You do still have to have a qualifier. Every spot, regardless of how you
Yeah.
get in, you have to have a qualifying race. There's nobody that gets around that. Whether you're on the board or the assistant race director or raffle lottery sponsor, you have to have a qualifying race. So keep that in mind. But there is a raffle option. And the one of the unique things about getting in through the raffle is those tickets, that those winners can transfer their entry. So if I were to
Right.
enter the raffle and won, I could give that entry to anybody I want, a friend or family. You can't sell them, but you can gift it to somebody. And again, as long as they have a qualifier. So those are the other ways besides our lottery to get in. So typically we end up with just an estimate. It does differ every year. Oh, I didn't talk about the admin spots. So all of our aid stations. So each of our aid stations, they're usually run by a running club or running store. They've been there for many, many years. They are each given a spot in the race to designate to one of their volunteers, however they'd like. And so once we have a tally of everybody that is running in those spots, which differs by a few spots every year, then whatever's left goes in the lottery, which is in the 275 range, let's just say.
Yeah.
So, like I said, it
Mhm.
does change from year to year a little bit. But that 369 number, can you tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about that, where it came from, and why it seems to be so random?
Yeah, it's there are ultra running is kind of in this day and age is a really numbers driven sort of sport, obviously, with algorithms and other things like that. 369 is one of those numbers you just say at a party or whatever amongst ultra runners, or you bring it up on a training run. People know exactly what you're talking about, and it's like
Mhm.
it's funny because you're exactly right, Carrie. It's an incredible. It's a seemingly random sounding number. So the story behind that is 1984. There's an act called the California Wilderness Act that's passed, which essentially tries to protect California's wilderness areas. These federally designated wilderness areas that the hope was they were getting loved to death. People were driving trucks into them, motorcycles, using all sorts of mechanized vehicles in and out. Some areas were getting used more than others, but essentially just trying to get all of that out of these protected wilderness areas. So this act is passed, and for those that know Western States course really well, we go into the Granite Chief Wilderness Area, which is federally protected. It fell underneath this California Wilderness Act. So this key area for our course, one of the most beautiful parts of our course, basically from about the 4 mile mark until about the 10 mile mark or 9 mile mark, essentially, this 5 or 6 mile stretch, the Western States would have been kicked out of that area based on the California Wilderness Act. So an intense lobbying effort commenced. The Tevis Cup and Western States, the organizations of both the ride and the run, got together and endlessly worked Congress to try to get an exception to this. To allow to sort of grandfather Western states in. This act was passed in 1984, but Western states had been going on, since essentially 1974, and the Tevis Cup had been going on since 1955. So trying to appeal to Congress about that. And so luckily what happened was there was a Republican congressman from Stockton named Norm Shumway, and he actually helped carry a lot of the legislative water on that. After he was lobbied extensively by, in particular, Tony Rossman, who was the legal counsel and a board member for Western States, and a longtime prominent Western States figure for Western States, and for the Tevis Cup, Hal Hall, who's a longtime historian, person who lives in Auburn. Tony, Hal, a few others really worked, Congress and the Forest Service. So eventually, an act was passed that allowed both the ride and the run to continue to use the Granite Chief Wilderness, and they basically based it on when the California Wilderness Act was passed in 1984, it just so happened in 1984, 369 runners had competed in Western states that year. That's how, and think back to like what we were just talking about, where there was, 14, then 63, then 100 and, 43, and it had grown up to 369 by that point. So that became the absolute limit that Western states would be allowed to have going forward, based on this exemption that it basically grandfathered in Western states to continue to be allowed to use the Granite Chief Wilderness. So that came about in 1988. Finally, so it was an extensive effort, really a Herculean effort on the part of the leadership of the Tevis Cup and Western states to make that happen. And that's, there have been a couple exceptions to that over the years. Every once in a while, Western states has been able to appeal to the Forest Service. 2008, the race was canceled, so that was a zero. There's this kind of running figure, this 5-year average of
Yeah.
369 runners. So one year there was a zero, so Western states was allowed to have more. I think it got as high, Western states has been as high as 423, based on these sort of, random things that have happened that have allowed that average to go up. But essentially it's 369.
Yeah, that actually was the case. Was it just my first year or first and second? I'd have to look back, but we were still making up spots from 2020 cancellation when I came on.
Yep. Yep. That's
So
right.
I can't remember if it was 379. It was more than 369, I can tell you that. I just can't remember exactly. But yes, we were making up spots. Then and I remember being so confused because I was like, okay, they said the cap's 369, but we have 370 something. And Craig explained like we were making up from having that 0 year in
Yeah.
2020. And then we had less in 2021 as well. No lottery for 2021
Uh-huh.
because we deferred everybody from
Uh-huh.
2020 after the cancellation. And then I think we had a handful less starters in 2021 due to the deferment, and not everybody was either able to or comfortable coming back to racing yet. Um, well, thank you for that history. It's
Yeah.
super interesting to hear that. I mean, first of all, what if we wouldn't have gotten the exception or being grandfathered in? Would it even be possible to reroute around the wilderness and have like a different
Yeah.
route, or would that just be the end of it? I don't know. I mean, it's interesting to think about, but luckily we don't have to because we got that and
Yeah.
we're still here. Um, 30 is that 30 years later? Whatever the math is
Yeah.
from 1984. So, but thank you for that history, John. To kind of wrap up lottery discussion, like I said, our lottery is going to be the first Saturday in December, as always. And we'll have a full house in person, but we'll have it live
Yeah.
streamed. So, for anybody that wants to see the action but can't tune in, I know a lot of people have watch parties. I actually recently was emailing with one of our um, 512 ticket entries.
Wow.
We
Oh
have, I
my.
think, 4 runners that are gonna have 512 tickets in the lottery. So basically that's 10 years of applying, and not getting in. So every time you apply for the lottery, which is entering with a new qualifying race. So every year that you want to get into the lottery, you have to have a new qualifying race. The races that you can't use it, for I know different races have different qualifying criteria, like such as Hard Rock. Ours is that you do have to have a fresh one every year, from 100K distance up, which is the list is on our website. We have 66, I think, going into this lottery, qualifying races that you could choose from. Anyhow, so you have to have a new race every year. And then basically, in a nutshell, your tickets double each year that you apply and you don't get selected. So our 512 ticket holders have tried, for 10 years. However, most of them did either get in through the lottery or through the wait list this past year, and then were not able to participate for one reason or another. They got
Oh.
injured, or by the time they were called on the wait list, it was, too late. Things happen, life happens. So I just want to say that. So they did get picked or placed on the wait list last year, but couldn't run. So they're back in the lottery. I was emailing with one of them asking, hey, are you going to be in person at the lottery this year? Are you flying in? Because they were not from California. And they then went on to write a pretty long email about what they do back home with their community for the lottery watch party. And it sounded incredibly special, and that they all get together that morning and they go
Yeah.
for a run and they have like a little party that day because they were not in on Pacific Standard Time, so it was even like later in the mornings. Anyhow, it sounded like a really fun time, just a good way to spend time with your community and hopefully celebrate hearing your name if you have the 512
Yeah.
tickets in the lottery. So let's hope they all get drawn. But so
Yeah.
in addition to in person, we know that there's thousands of people across the world watching and listening for their name to get called and hopefully for their most of them not hearing their name but for a lucky roughly 300 hearing their name, and we draw 75 names that
Yeah.
go on the wait list. That way we do not show up on race morning with any less than that 369, because it's gonna happen that people get hurt or things in life come up and they have to withdraw, and then we invite folks off of the wait list in the order that we draw them when that happens. Um, and also a rule that was changed, I don't know what year, but before I came on, is that if you do have to withdraw before the race for any reason,
Yeah.
injury,
Yeah.
travel, life, sickness, um, you don't lose your tickets. I know that wasn't
Yeah.
always the case. And man, that's rough. Like, could you imagine having however many tickets, but even like, thinking having 64 tickets or 128 and then getting an injury. So are you
Yeah.
gonna just suck it up and show up at the start line injured with a very low chance of finishing because you don't want to lose your tickets? So luckily, you all changed that. Like, I believe it was in Craig's tenure, but don't quote me on that. But
Yeah.
I'm sure you were
It
part of the
was.
board when that changed. It was
Yeah.
with Craig's tenure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Um, Okay, so yeah, that was changed. So now you don't lose your tickets, thankfully, if you have to withdraw before 1 p.m. the day before the race. And then another thing that was changed in 2020, that you no longer have to apply consecutive years to
Yeah.
not lose your tickets. Prior to 2020, if you did not apply every year or request a one-time buy, and you had to request it, and
Yeah.
it was only one time
Yeah.
that you could skip, all those tickets would go away. And so that seemed pretty harsh as well. So that you all changed that, Craig and the board, that you no longer have to apply in consecutive years. So there's people that have tickets from 4 or so years ago and haven't applied, but their tickets still sitting there waiting for them for next time they run a qualifier and are able to enter back into the lottery and see those tickets double. So that's really in a nutshell of how the lottery works. You have reapply and your chances double. And on our website, we actually have some fun math to look at from last year's lottery of the probabilities. And we will be updating that once we have all the
Mhm.
totals from 2026 lottery with the probabilities. How many people with one ticket, how many people with two, four, eight, so forth, applied, and what the chances of them getting in are. So it's just pretty fun, especially for any of the what we call the geeks out there that love all the numbers and the data. It's a fun
Yeah.
thing to look at, and we have that listed on the website too. We actually have a page. I think it's called like Geeks or for the Geeks or something of that sort, which is
Geeks
is
only.
is a fun way to put it. As runners, we love numbers and we love to look at data for the most part. So, anything else we should mention about the lottery, John, before we jump to our next subject? Just looking at my notes. Anything else you can think of to mention about the upcoming lottery?
Yeah, I think you did a great job of describing all the different pathways in Carrie. And it's just interesting to think about. Like I on the side, I've written for Ultra Running Magazine for a long time, and I have a piece coming up in an upcoming issue about Jan Black, who ran the
Mm,
race this
yeah.
year and finished the race. And Jan was our oldest finisher this year, 72 years old. He's a retired family medicine doctor, lives up in Olympia, Washington. Finished in the golden hour, early in the golden hour. I think just a little bit maybe in front of you, in fact, Carrie.
You
And
could have left that
um,
out. You could have left that out. Just kidding. Well, I just lost John Trent. He's having some technical issues, so I will finish this out solo. Um, but Jan Black finished the race this year, as he mentioned, in the golden hour before me. Thanks, John. And he wrote a piece on him in Ultra Running Magazine. Not sure exactly when that'll come out, but probably next month, I assume, or this maybe in November. But anyhow, a few things that I actually meant to talk about at the beginning of the podcast was just kind of give a overview of why we started this podcast and what you can expect in future episodes. Um, there's, it's kind of multifaceted of why we wanted to start this podcast, because it's fun. It's a fun way to connect with the Western States community more than we do so now throughout the entire year, and bring information to the growing Western States community. Our website is very extensive with details and information, but we figured we would add to that by creating a podcast. Our goal is once a month, and to talk about all subjects of Western States, the spirit of Western States, and also informational. So throughout the year, we have a lot of different topics to cover. And even though it's, a one time a year event, we have things going on year round. And we will touch on some aspect, or maybe all, each episode of the 3 pillars of the Western States Endurance Run Foundation. Our 3 pillars are trail stewardship, which is maintaining the Western States Trail. We will hopefully have our trails manager on for an episode to talk about what it means to maintain a trail such as Western States and everything that goes into that, and the amount of time and volunteers, money, things of that sort, of the funds that are required that that it takes to maintain 100 miles of trail that goes through multiple entities such as the U.S. Forest Service and the wilderness and the state, private property, and so forth. So hopefully we will be able to get John Katz on here, our trails manager, to talk more about trail stewardship, which is obviously extremely important, because without the trail and without his driving force and volunteers and so forth, then there wouldn't be a run. Bringing us to our next pillar of the organization is the run itself, and that's putting on a world-class event. I am going to bring up our mission. Seems like a good time to talk about our mission at Western States, and it's to deliver a world-class ultra running experience to every athlete. So that basically encompasses our next pillar of the organization is the run itself. And our third pillar is medical research. We do more medical research in the ultra running world and ultra running events than any other organization, and have more published research articles than any other event. We have a new medical research director who recently came on, so we're going to be inviting her on for an episode with our medical director, Andy Pasternak. And in addition to our 3 pillars and diving into each one of those, we will also get into a lot of the logistics of Western States. So we plan on having an episode just about crewing Western States, pacing. We will have an episode regarding media around Western States, which has grown, just like everything else, quite a bit over the years. And we continue to see more media interest in the event. So we'll go into what it takes to get media credentials, what you can expect being on, on a media team coming to Western States. So we'll have a episode about that, which will be in the spring of next year. Most of our episodes or all of our episodes will be relevant for the time of the year of what is going on for the race. So our next episode in December will be a lottery recap episode. And then as we get closer and closer to the race, will be media, pacers, and of course we'll have an episode just about running the race, what you can expect on the course, any, aid stations, really anything to do with running and being a race participant in Western States. So that's and then at the end of each episode, we plan to have a race director report. So we'll get any current events or current updates from Craig Thornley and myself, and we will end each episode with an RD report. Um, and that is what we're planning to do. And just reading through my notes, make sure. So I think I already mentioned we're planning on to do one a year, one a month. Perhaps we, switch that up and do two if we have enough to talk about and content and if we're, have the interest and the demand there. But as of right now, we're planning on doing once a month and starting this month, of course, in November, this is our first episode and diving into lottery recap next month. So we will close out this episode with our first RD report, which is pretty short this time, but we do have a couple updates that will affect our 2026 runners. And that is two rule changes that were just implemented in the board meeting last month in October. And that is the usage of trekking poles and micro spikes at the race. So in the 52 years, 52, are we going into 53? So I think 53 years, 52 years of the race. Yeah, this was year 52, 2025. We've not allowed trekking poles or micro spikes. And that both of those rules were just changed in October. So starting in 2026 and beyond, runners will have the option to use trekking poles and micro spikes. Micro spikes will be useful in high snow years. This year when I ran, they would not have been needed. We wouldn't have needed micro spikes. There were a few areas of patches of snow, but very sporadic. So I wouldn't have needed them. But there's been many years that you've had 10 or 20 or more miles of snow. I know my first year of working in Western States in 2023, there was it was a very heavy snow year, and I'm sure probably most runners would have taken advantage of microspikes if they would have been allowed. We're excited to have that option for runners if they choose to take it, and then also trekking poles. And there's plenty of people that love to run with trekking poles, whether it's for balance or stability, going into the night, being tired. Lots of benefits to trekking poles. So you now have the option as a runner to bring poles to the race. So those are the two big updates and the very brief RD report as of now. Otherwise, we are just deep in lottery and verifying qualifying races and prepping for our big day in Auburn in December to choose our 2026 field of runners. And that is a wrap for episode 1 of the Spirit of Western States. Appreciate you joining us. And too bad John Trent had to leave us abruptly. He's having technical difficulties, but we will get that straightened out for our next episode. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you soon.